Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Parenting Hour. You're tuned in to Unity FM 93.5 in the West Midlands and 105.1 if you're tuned into us further down the country. I hope, inshallah, you're having a good day, a pleasant week, inshallah, amidst this cold weather, although it's a bit milder today. And amidst this lockdown, our third lockdown, subhanAllah, how good you're all doing to be able to keep indoors and keep to the regulations and look after your children and teach your children and look after yourselves. Inshallah, it's a big task, but you're all doing well, mashallah, in that. I know we've all come to a little bit of struggles and we all worry about them, and the struggles are getting harder, but here we are here this evening trying to help you with your struggles, inshallah, and your approaches, inshallah, and how we can help you to help you with your children. So this evening's topic is about talking to your children about developmental stages in some way, but in how they can build relationships, or how family relationships are formed, not just family relationships, but about puberty, about couple relationships, about changes that happen that parents are often worried about. How do they open these topics and how do they discuss this? And often in my experience, they leave it very late. They put it on the long fingers, we say, and it just kind of is left there and parked and double parked and triple parked. And then in the end, it becomes a catastrophe because there's a big traffic jam there and you don't know what to do. And this evening we want to talk about that with our wonderful guests with us. So we've got Sister Abeda, mashallah, as you know well, in the studio. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Abeda.
Alaikum salam rahmatullah.
And Assalamu alaikum, Brother Saeed, are you there?
Alhamdulillah, Sister Kathleen.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good, alhamdulillah. I'm very good indeed. Amongst all these messages that are coming in and all these news flashes, we actually have a little competition in our house now with my growing up children and my husband when there's a news flash in to see whose phone gets it first. It's like bing bong, all the phones go off at the same time. But I'm not the first one, I never win. Alhamdulillah. How are you both?
Alhamdulillah. Good. Alhamdulillah.
Good.
Nice to be here, Kathleen.
Alhamdulillah. It's good to be with you again. Alhamdulillah. We're so grateful that we are here, alhamdulillah, and able to talk to our listeners this evening and hopefully invite them to ring in and engage in the conversations, because this is something that we would like to talk more openly about. And we've been talking about this for a while, or we've been planning this for a while, about the importance of having conversations and assisting parents in having conversations about development, inshallah, and able to talk to their children. And I know it is something that you both do in your professions, mashallah, as well, do this a lot. Now, parents, as I said, they often park this for many years. And I remember in Approachable Parenting a few years ago, we did a little CD, going back now, maybe 6, 7 or more years, about talking to your children about sexual relationships. And it started with starting at the beginning, starting when your baby is born, being able to change their nappy in a private place, asking their permission when you're doing this, making sure that other members of the family are not around looking when they don't need to look. What do you think of this approach that parents should be doing? Should they be doing little approaches like this step by step, or should they wait until later on and then sit down and have the talk? I can see a lot of smiling with both of you indeed. I don't, Sister Abeda, would you like to go first?
Inshallah. So I definitely am a big believer of being proactive rather than reactive. And I definitely believe what you said. So in terms of starting very early on, because with children, obviously, it becomes very difficult when you leave things and it becomes an elephant in the room kind of a thing. And as families, if we deal with things in a way that nobody has a permission to talk about things, then obviously we know later on children would go and they would find their own ways, they would find their own knowledge, which is going to be problematic, because a lot of times what they receive or perceive or learn from the internet or their own friends or different ways of learning, obviously that's not in line with the family values or the education that we need to give them. So I think it's very important to start on exactly like you said, when they're very young, when they're babies, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
And
I think sorry,
Brother Saeed?
now I think it's very important in terms of, as Sister Abeda said, I think the first thing is knowledge is power in every aspect of life, in all aspects of life. And the other thing, I think, when we have information, when we share knowledge, then we don't leave that vacuum to be filled by someone else. And often that when there's lack of information with children, it affects them in their development, but also affects them in adult life. So often they get information, about themselves or about former relationships in terms of, their spouses, when they get older, when they get married. And often that lack of information or the wrong type of information kind of leaves them, affected and impacted in their lives. And the other thing is about establishing safety. I think it's really important to have safety in the family where we can explore have these conversations, explore these difficult issues or that the people might shy away from in the confinement of the space that is safe and that is healthy in the family surroundings. So, that's really important. So people can speak about these things with confidence, with modesty to each other without having to seek information from elsewhere, where that information sometimes is given, as the wrong information or as the, information that is not really compatible with the values of the family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you're going to add to it also with some Islamic knowledge about haya and how we should be building this in our children right from the beginning, right, to understand what is their aura, what they need to do and how they need to cover this and what does it mean for the individual.
Absolutely, and I think it's starting from early on, teaching children what is appropriate and what is not. And often, by giving children the information, that, even, to be mindful of certain things, so it's about protecting children by giving them the information from the start and telling them that this is, acceptable, this is not, this is right, this is wrong. If you have those conversations, then also you're protecting your children from abuse, from other things that might happen to them, because if they don't know, often you hear about, adults who will say, this happened to me, but I didn't know this was wrong, because the parents never spoke to them about it. And the other thing is about, obviously, the concept of haya and modesty and having that. It doesn't mean that when we have haya, we don't seek information, we don't seek knowledge. No, haya is about being modest, is about being applying things in the right way as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to, but also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to learn and to do the things that He wants us to do in our lives, in terms of that are conducive with Quran and Sunnah.
Exactly, mashallah. I'm sure there is parents out there that could ring in this evening and help us in this conversation, join in this conversation, ask us questions if they want to. You know our number, it's 0121 772 8892. Please do ring in and join in the conversation with us, inshallah, because we find it's lovely to have interactive conversations. Sister Abeda, I'm thinking of a family that may find it difficult to talk to even their young children about reproductive, about changes in the body, reproductive system changes in the body, about them growing up, what would happen, etc. What advice would you give to parents to where to start? We mentioned starting at the baby and having that in place. Well, when their children are a little bit older, they could even be 4, 5, 6, and they're watching a TV program and something comes up, you know, it could be David Attenborough talking about something, and then something comes up, parents then shut it off immediately, or you know, they don't respond. Where would we start? What can we do? How can we help them?
I think the best thing is to let the child lead. So if the child is curious, and if they have a question, no matter what the age they are, if we divert them and if we distract them, I think that's kind of fractures the relationship between the parent and the child. So what I normally feel is the best thing to do is to moderate and manage our answer according to their age, and give them the age appropriate information. So they're never too young. So if they're curious, that means that they're thinking. So if they're thinking that they've asked a question, then it's our responsibility and it's their right that they are given a right answer, rather than us lying about it or distracting or whatever, where they feel that they can't really come to us and approach us and ask for us. So in terms of what Brother Saeed was saying earlier, or kind of thinking about nurturing a safe environment so the child can come and ask us. So whatever they've seen, if they have a question, then we don't need to panic, because the minute we panic, as mothers especially, if we panic, then what we're telling our children is that it's not safe to come to us. So even if it's a question that is making us slightly uneasy, because obviously everybody's own level of comfort is different, and it's something that we all have to work on. Now, in terms of how we address that, so like I said, if we would address a question that a 4-year-old will ask, would be very different. The answer would be different from, so let's say, a teenager asking a question. So it's never too early, and obviously it's never too late. So I would encourage mothers to be able to address the first, acknowledge and praise the child that they're very intelligent, they've asked a good question, and Allah has made everybody, and then kind of in a practical way. And I think when we talk about these things in a clinical, practical way, then the children relate to it as a matter of fact thing, because this is all matter of fact. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's nothing in our bodies that we should be ashamed of, because Allah has made that, right? And there's always a beautiful function to everything. So I think the more empowered and relaxed we are as mothers and fathers, the more it would be transferred to our children.
Wonderful. That's really lovely to see. So I suppose the first thing they could do is breathe and just take a breath out, especially if it's come out of the blue. And as you say, children are curious and things come up, and there's lots of opportunities there that you can start with animals and addressing animals, like how does animals mate and how they have babies, and maybe even children might even have pets. So there's opportunities at home for parents to talk about this.
Yeah, and I think it's also, isn't it important to think why am I struggling to talk about that? So is it something that never happened in my family, or is there a misconception in my head that these topics are taboo topics, so there's something wrong with the addressing these? So I think as parents we have to do some reflection and see how what's stopping us from discussing these things as well.
That's really good advice there. And I think from an Irish background myself, especially when I was raised up, it wasn't spoken about in the house. It wasn't something that was a conversational piece. And I think a lot of families still today suffer that, but we need to change ourselves. As you said, mashallah, both of you said, you know, Allah has given us these bodies and made us male and female, alhamdulillah, and knowledge is powerful, and we do need our children to be able to understand the correct knowledge, because I have often heard over the years as well, children picking up wrong things and understanding things in a wrong way. That has detrimental consequences. Have either of you come across this in your practices about this, and as well as taking that deep breath and kind of for parents to understand? Do you see that some parents might need to educate themselves with terminology, with body part names, or do you think our parents now, you know, in this modern day and age, know everything?
Would you like me to answer that, or Brother Saeed?
Carry on, Stab.
Carry on here.
I mean, in my understanding, I think what is really important is that, as Brother Said said, the whole concept of haya, obviously our kind of, like you were saying, Kathleen, in terms of our backgrounds, what doesn't come naturally to us, obviously we struggle a bit, but it's so important that we give children the right terminology, and like I said, make them familiar and understand, because that's where we start the whole thing about what's safe, what's unsafe, what are the barriers, and what the barriers in terms of physically when we think about children keeping themselves. Because if you think about sexual abuse, for instance, in young children, child-on-child sexual abuse in schools with young children, there's a lot of stuff that's happening with young children which would put them at risk at a very young age. And if we are not really giving them those boundaries, that, you know, other people are not allowed to touch them inappropriately, that's a conversation that mothers and fathers should be having rather than leaving it to school, I believe. So I think language is very, very important, and it's about us practicing and working on our own anxieties with that. So what do you think, Brother Saeed?
Absolutely, and I think is that kind of dialogue, having that dialogue and using appropriate language to that the child understand. But also, as we said, in terms of modesty and using the, you know, wisdom rather than kind of using ignorance where we just ignore it or push it under the carpet. And I think sometimes when we look at the issue, for example, of pornography and the addiction that often young people or you know, people have with pornography. And there was a study recently, I think in America and also in Canada, that lots of children are exposed to kind of imagery and things like that. And often because they have this curiosity as children and they don't know how to frame it or put it in the right context or put it in the right way. And then they get exposed to these things and they don't know how to handle them, how to handle this imagery, or they haven't been taught by their parents, you know, what is halal, what is haram, what is right, what is wrong. And often, you know, that kind of exposure affects them and the brain gets rewired. And often, you know, they will be kind of addicted to that stuff, you know, for a very, very long time and into adulthood. And often, and I'm sure Sister Abeda will expand on this, that's, you know, is very, very tricky, you know, addiction to get people off this topic, off this addiction. And I, you know, dealt with clients who are adults now, you know, in their 30s, and they have children, their own children, but they will say, you know, they were exposed to this kind of imagery and they didn't know how to handle it because they never had the tools. Nobody told them this is right, this is wrong. And because of that, they became addicted, and now they're trying to get off the addiction. But because of the brain has been wired in this way, is very difficult. But also the other thing is abuse, and sometimes by protecting our children, you know, by giving them information, by telling them this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, we empowering them to protect themselves, as Sister Abeda said, you know, from abuse. The thing is that sometimes is our own kind of, you know, we because we don't want to be kind of we don't want to talk about things, is sometimes, you know, children are very receptive to information if it's given in the right way. But often the adults, because they have their own hang-ups about certain things or cultural stuff, or and you're not supposed to be talking about things like that. And then they don't end up kind of, you know, just from their own worry and their own anxiety, they just dismiss it. And then the child grows up thinking, you know, well, this is not normal.
Yeah, that is so true. So it all comes back to the adults, and no matter what your upbringing was, and things have changed a lot in society, and things are much more open now than they used to be. So maybe that upbringing was okay for those days, but now parents need to educate themselves for their children. And this is very Islamic point, that we are supposed to educate our children for their generation, not for our generation, but for their generation. Definitely. And everything has moved on very, very quickly. So, and I totally agree with you. The parents need to find out the proper medical names for body parts to be able to label them and describe them with the proper names, rather than shying away or using abbreviation or a different name, and then children understanding slang, and it becomes very difficult and complicated. I'm just wondering now, we have probably parents listening in and they're tuning in like anything to us, because when any programs like this are on the radio, I know our parents are really keen to understand and learn more, because it is hard to start. And although we set down the foundations and the great foundations of having that high-end understanding about where are your private areas and what needs to be covered, when we start talking about reproductive either body parts or acts, what age roughly, in the full aspect of things, should we be kind of having and thinking about having serious conversations if it had never come up in the past? So for parents that maybe have never experienced in the past, or even for parents that have experienced in the past, have started talking about, the different things and talk about the rabbits that they have, and they explain little bits here and there, but haven't moved over kind of to the really understanding of the human body. What do you think would be the kind of roughly? I know it's very hard. I'm putting you both on the spot here because it is really difficult depending on the age and the developmental stages, I suppose, of the child. But where would you think we could start roughly?
Well, I think, again, it's never a one-off conversation. And we would set ourselves up for failure if we say, okay, gather everybody, and today we're going to have the big talk, really. Because that's just that's not how children want to learn, really. So I think, again, going back to the proactive way of teaching, is that you use little opportunities and little ways of injecting the right information as and when it's needed and it's appropriate, rather than flooding them with one big lecture or sending them off to a class or whatever, because I don't think that's the right thing. And the other thing is that Islamically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a really straightforward, sensible framework. Now, if you even going back to, if you think about the aura, covering of the aura, teaching our children that, and then giving them words like, your private parts are private, obviously, and like in the house, for instance, making children understand that our bedrooms are private, our bathrooms are private. So whatever is, so Islamically, we know that we are encouraged to encourage our children to knock before they come into our rooms, right? So it's about instilling right boundaries from a very young age. And even with when we talk about private rooms, private body parts, and even when we talk about safeguarding children from inappropriate stuff, whether they might see something on YouTube or elsewhere. So we say to them that these are private films or private movies which are not appropriate for us. So kind of really, we don't have to use very inappropriate words if we don't want to, but we have to give them the right vocabulary and, like you said, words, Kathleen.
I think the other thing is, I think the word is we use, is developmental. So it's about development. It's about, when you're developing something, you adapt to that development as the development is ongoing and is evolving and changing. So you have, children, they grow and they develop and they change themselves, their bodies change, they start to have a different ability to comprehend and conceptualize certain things. So it's about kind of being able to adapt to that development. That's the first thing. Secondly, is about, often we think about knowledge, and often people think about knowledge just from, it's not that book, just getting information from books or from schools, but the parents are huge source of knowledge for the children. And the parents, if they have, they teach their children in the right way, what is appropriate and what is not, that can have a huge significance on, developing that sense of self, sense of confidence, sense of being able to be comfortable to ask questions, but also be comfortable to be able to kind of sift, through the information and use what is appropriate and what is acceptable, from an Islamic perspective. And that's really important. I think we ask children sometimes, where do you get your information from? And often they will say, from our friends or from social media. So we live in an age where, everything is almost like, you only have, go to the internet or go to any kind of TV program sometimes that children be watching. Sometimes there's these kind of conversations are being, had on TV, even in television, children television, for example.
Exactly.
There are messages and hidden messages sometimes.
We're going to have to go get our information now from the advertisements, I'm afraid, in the commercial break, because we're heading into a commercial break right now. So sorry to cut you off, Brother Saeed. Indeed, and I want our listeners to join us after this commercial break, inshallah, where we continue our conversation. Assalamu alaikum.
Wow.
Brilliant. That was really good. Sorry for cutting you in there, but
well done.
We have 4 minutes now before we go back on air again.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so that was the break there. I was on time, perfect.
Perfect.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
I like your countdown. Thank you. The 15 seconds is really good.
No worries.
What do we want to focus on for the next half of the show, inshallah?
I was thinking maybe we can talk about relationships a little bit.
Yeah.
Kind of really responsibility for the parents to mirroring healthy relationships where people both mom and dad are feeling safe, respected, values, and all those things that, because a lot of children, we know that as they become adults they feel that's their norm, so they create that cycle in their own relationships.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a good discussion to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else, Brother Saeed?
No, I think it's really important. I think, modeling behavior and having that positive behavior and within between the parents is really important, but also adopting things like, for example, respect, appreciation of each other in the family home. And that can often be the template for how they develop, when they are older, how they are able to see relationships and work on them and model that behavior. And I think that's really important, definitely.
Do you want to go into respecting as couples, respecting each other's?
I think it's about, respecting each other, but also I think it's about having boundaries. I think is really important. So setting boundaries, respecting each other as couples, also, having value in people. So, we're not seeing, for example, Islam came in and put, things in their place. So we talk about the role of women, for example, Islam came and didn't see women as just, as a commodity like they used to be in the past, but as they are equal to men in terms of what they bring, to contribute and in terms of goodness, that to their families, to the society. So it's how we allow that to happen in the family rather than kind of just see, people as objects sometimes.
What about, that's really good. And which leads on, what about to a woman or a couple where there is no relationship in that couple, because there's always a headache or there's always something, where to seek help? Are you okay if I lead you into some questions like this?
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing that we should have touched on is with young children, when you talk about safety, is also about what's appropriate touching and not appropriate touching. And from a very young age, it's our responsibility to teach our young children. And there are exemptions that when they're very young, nursery age, only mom or dad can touch them, or a doctor can touch them if they need any medical assistance or whatever. And I think that's so important for children to understand, because a lot of children don't understand that, because parents don't think they need to tell their children that.
Right. Sorry to interrupt. We're going live in about 15 seconds.
Okay, we're ready for live indeed, which lead me into something else that will be
Yeah. Yeah. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome listeners back to Parenting Hour. You're tuned into Unity FM 93.5 here in Birmingham and 105.1 if you're tuned into us down further south. My name is Kathleen Roche-Nagi, We've had a wonderful show, the first half already, and we're having another second half. I'm looking forward to the second half of the show with Sister Abeda and Brother Saeed. We're talking about talking to your children about their development and about talking to them about how they grow and develop and how they approach puberty, what you should be explaining to them, what you should be teaching them about relationships, about couple relationships, about what is right and what is wrong. And we've spoken a lot about that in the first part of the show, setting the foundations, looking at each child and their haya and their aura and explaining this to them, and parents having the correct language, learning the correct words for the correct body parts, and being able to explain to children and finding opportunities to learn and to explain to children. Because as my guest explained, it's not the sit down once off talk, but when you're talking to your children about anything, and especially about sexuality, it is the spiral effect that we use, like the schools use, that it's a drip method. You build on it. You take one piece and then you build on it, and you come back and build on it and build on it. So it's the spiral teaching approach that we use also here. And you don't miss opportunities when you are with your children. No age is too young or no age is too old. So we've talked a lot about this, mashallah, in the first half of the session. We're also talking a bit about dress and about appropriate dress, and it reminded me there over the break about children dressing for PE and swimming. And when I talk about appropriate dress, how do they undress and keep their haya, and how do they get into their PE shorts and or their swimming gear, and vice versa. And I think this is important in this conversation, that we should be talking about this and looking at this as well as touch. So let me go back again to my guests and talk a little bit more about that. You know, we have children starting nursery now at age 3, but it's not until a bit later on when they start going to school, they have to change into their PE clothes and they go for swimming. And I know things have changed over the years, because I remember hearing from my friends, and thank God it never happened to my family, but I remember my friends saying that their children would have to change in their classroom, strip down right down to their underwear, and then put on their clothes. I remember teaching my children how to dress and undress themselves, even if they had to do that in the classroom, how they could do it modestly. Do you think parents are doing this or think about that? What do you think, Sister Ashley?
I think parents sometimes can be quite a bit complacent, because it's not the question of blaming, because you just think of school and you think it's a safe environment, and alhamdulillah it is mostly a safe environment. May Allah protect all our children. But I think whatever we build at home will go into school. So in terms of how we make sure that in the house, we make sure that children are changing in a private setting, that we're not making them change in the living room or in the kitchen or whatever. So they get used to these are the protocols or the boundaries. And then obviously they take that to school, like you did with your children, that you don't just strip, you kind of, it's a way of doing, you put something on first before you take something else off or whatever. So you're just giving them tools and skills, really. Similarly with one of the things that is so important, because we see what it can lead to if we're not vigilant. So for instance, appropriate touching and inappropriate touching. So for young children, they need to understand, and it's again our mothers and fathers' responsibility to teach them how people are allowed to touch them and not allowed to touch them. And for us, obviously, on the broader spectrum, which teach them the whole concept of mahram and non-mahram anyway. But for young children, when they're very young, they need to know that so their mom and dad and maybe a doctor can touch them in a certain place if they need to, and nobody else can. And that is a simple thing, but it is such an important thing for our children to have in terms of their knowledge. So I believe that it's extremely important.
Would you have anything to add to that, Brother Saeed, about touching and safe areas, etc.?
Yeah, I think what we said earlier, I think going back to a concept of haya and being modest, and modesty in Islam is very important, you know, and establishing boundaries. So, you know, when we establish boundaries, it's about teaching children how to look after themselves, how to respect their bodies, how to value themselves, but also how to value others. And it's about, you know, giving value. So we, you know, the body that the person has is a trust, you know, that we are entrusted with it by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is an amana that we have to look after. And by looking after ourselves in the right way, by handling ourselves in the right way, you know, by practicing modesty, by looking after ourselves in terms of protection, by teaching our children to be, to have those kind of tools, we are empowering them to look after themselves. And I think sometimes that will come from the way the parents are at home and how they behave and the language they use and how they conduct themselves. Often children will model their behavior on the behavior of the parents. So the parents are with each other, how they practice modesty, how they behave, you know, in a modest way at home, how they talk about things appropriately. That will be a template for the children to follow. So the parents often, you know, we, as Sister Abeda said earlier, so it's not about just giving someone a lecture, but it's about often what you do and your behavior will be mirrored by that child. And that's really important. So it's about paying attention to our behavior as well as giving the right information.
That's really important to actually bring up the parents now. It's very interesting, isn't it, that we're going to put the parents on the spotlight now, because the parents may not have thought about what they do at home, how they interact together, how they cuddle and greet each other, how they sit together on the couch or sit together as a family would have an impact on the child later on down the line. And I'm sure in your, both of you as counselors, you've come across many instances that people have developed difficulties because things have been like parents don't sit together. Parents, they have one chair, they're sitting at other sides of the couches because if they get any closer, or maybe it's alarm bells ring or something like this, we're not supposed to be like this in front of the children. What will the children think? And it's giving the wrong messages to children. They might be giving the very opposite messages. Okay, can we talk a bit about this, about how we can give children the right messages from the beginning?
You often see that in couple counseling, for example. You have young couple who will come to counseling and they just got married and they will start having problems, whether it's problems regarding intimacy or relating to one another or handling the relationship. And often when you look and you analyze the reasons, you know, for the conflict or for the difficulties they experience, you often see that this is resulting from their upbringing and the way they were parented. And often, you know, someone will say, I never knew that this was acceptable or not acceptable. And some people say, you know, I never had that in my family. So for example, if we think about the you know, sometimes hugging one another, you know, a lot of adults will say, I don't hug anybody because I've never been hugged as a child by my parents. I never, you know, that wasn't practiced in our family, you know, to give each other hugs, you know, appropriately. So sometimes they will say when we are older, it is very hard for me to then change that and revert to something that I'm not familiar with. Sometimes, you know, being able to see each other in a very respectful way, because if they saw the father disrespecting the mother, then the son will grow up thinking, well, this is how I was married. But then that will kind of result in conflict and problems. So I think often is about that kind of narrative and that kind of modeling behavior that is a
I think we've lost you there, Brother Saeed, I'm afraid.
But also from an experiential perspective, from the parent perspective, that will form how you see the world in adulthood.
You must come across this so much in your line of work, both of you, indeed, where situations arise from lack of knowledge and how children are raised. So how should parents behave? What is the acceptable boundaries, guidelines about parents behave? You know, I'm in Islam, when we're talking about our Muslim couples here. And I think we're very lucky to be Muslims, mashallah, because we have a tradition of hugging and kissing each other, which, you know, was something that I welcomed when I came into Islam, which I wasn't used to before. For lots of countries, it's not like this. So how can we grow those boundaries and those parameters and know that they're the right ones?
Absolutely. I think, as you said, alhamdulillah, the way we are as Muslims, we like that connection. I think we all are missing that because of the virus these days, aren't we? So I suppose if you think about the home environment, so you think about attachment and bonding between the baby and the mother or the father, and then you think about the relationships that that child is going to witness and see. All that will shape what this child is going to be an adult, both in terms of adult relationships, intimacy and passion on the sexual side, and also in terms of how they're going to feel safe and secure or anxious or dysfunctional or disorganized in their attachment. Because attachment and bonding and connection is not just for childhood, really. It's not just a phenomena that's important between a mother and a child. It's not just, it doesn't stop at childhood. It kind of stays, because we all, as adults, we want to feel connection, don't we? So I think if you think about the home environment, so being loving and showing affection is a beautiful thing, and I don't understand why should there ever be a problem in hugging or being loving or being courteous or showing it, because we know that's our tradition. And Brother Saeed will tell us more about how the Prophet ﷺ used to be affectionate towards both his children and obviously his spouses as well. So I think Islam is very clear. Obviously, there are cultural problems, as we all know, and it's quite interesting that you come from an Irish background, Brother Saeed comes from a Yemeni background, and I come from a Pakistani background, but we all know that there's been a issue in the past, but we can bypass that and go back to our beautiful Islamic tradition, can't we?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, when we see the Prophet ﷺ, how he was with children, you know, he would be hugging and kissing, you know, his grandchildren, his own children, Hassan and Hussein, you know, may Allah be pleased with them. One day he was kissing them, and someone came, his name was Al-Aqra ibn Habis. And he said to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I have 10 children, I never kissed any of them. The Prophet ﷺ said, what can I do if Allah has taken the mercy from your heart? So it's about teaching them what is appropriate, you know. Also, you know, the Sahaba would come and ask questions, you know, about their own kind of private lives, about their marital issues, and they will ask the Prophet ﷺ, or the women will come and ask the Prophet ﷺ, or they will ask Aisha, and she will ask on their behalf. So there was that dialogue, you know, in a very healthy environment, very respectful environment. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you know, man amila salihan, whoever does good, male or female, and they believe in, we will give them a good life. Meaning that, you know, everything that we do, you know, has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a channel for it. You know, everything that we have as a desire. So for example, you know, people might have a sexual desire, then the marriage was created, you know, for as a channel, as a conduit for that desire. You know, we have food, we have the need to have food. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, wants us to eat from halal sources, you know, halal tayyib, which is, you know, halal and wholesome. Similarly, with the relationships, it has to be halal and wholesome. And within the confinement of what is halal, then there is plenty of scope, you know, to look to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and see how he modeled, you know, these kind of issues and topics, and how he educated his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, and they felt comfortable to come and ask him any question they had. So there was no taboo subject, you know, there was no subject that was left, you know, for you know, there was no left, you know, not to be discussed or not to be explored, you know, as long as things are done in an appropriate manner and with modesty and with respect.
Excellent in your answers there. If a parent is embarrassed about this, could one parent take over discussing this with both her sons or his sons and daughters, or her sons and daughters? And would that be sufficient if there's one of them in the house that is more competent at it than the other in explaining terminology, etc.? What do you think? As sometimes our parents are maybe shy, or maybe the mothers are more comfortable speaking to the girls and the fathers more comfortable speaking to the boys. Is that okay?
I don't think there's anything wrong with one person, because you see, the thing is that ideally you would want both mother and father to be equals and on board and 100% comfortable with everything. But hey, life is not ideal, and sometimes people have their own boundaries or whatever, and they're struggling with certain things, and that's fine. You know, give them that time, and that's okay. So I don't think there's anything wrong, because the mother has a role to play, and that's a really important role. And when we start from a very young age, the mother can very easily, or even the father can very easily instill the right boundaries and give the appropriate knowledge, because it's all knowledge that's needed and necessary, and that Islamically appropriate and endorsed. So all those fears and phobias are obviously irrational and misplaced. So I don't believe that there is any need for it to be gender specific in that sense.
Yeah. I think this is when things are done, you know, based on love for the children, you know, and done in a loving way, you know, and being that love was expressed to the children in a healthy way, you know, and being told they are valued, and they're, you know, by the parents, they are appreciated. You know, the Prophet ﷺ will teach his companions, you know, how to express their love for one another. You know, one day he was sitting with his companions, and the man came, he walked by, and one of the companions said, "I love this brother." He said, "Have you told him?" He said, "No." He said, "Chase after him and tell him that you love him for the sake of Allah." So when we teach our children, we tell them that they are precious, that we value them, and that's they become to value themselves. Often when you see people who don't have any value for themselves, then they might practice behavior that is unhealthy, where if a child is being taught, you know, to appreciate themselves, to respect themselves, because they were respected and valued and loved by the parents, then they will find that confidence to come to the parent and ask questions, because they know the parent is receptive and open, but also the parents is not going to shout or scream or shy away, but the parents will do it in a very loving, nurturing way that doesn't create any hang-ups for that child.
Could I also, sorry.
Go ahead.
Can I also just add that sometimes both the parents don't have the confidence or the knowledge or the skills or the tools or whatever. And it doesn't matter, because as long as you have family, extended family, friends, community people that you trust and you respect, and you know their value systems are in line with yours, then we use that, because as a community, as we always say, that it takes a village to raise a child, right? So as a community, we can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that, really. If our children are going to a study circle and we trust that teacher and we have that relationship, then we can ask for nasiha and guidance from them as well, because we're all learning. And as Brother Saeed said, there's no shame. So as parents, we should always be willing to learn the skills that we don't have. As we come to your courses, Kathleen, to learn from the pregnancy to 3, right? So it's the same principle. We learn what we don't know, and we're never too old to learn, right?
Definitely, indeed. And if you look at all we've learned in this lockdown, and since March, mashallah, I can't believe all that I've learned, actually, especially around technology. SubhanAllah. Yeah. So it is great, and we should have that open mindset that we are learning and seek knowledge, which is a reward. We gain rewards for seeking knowledge. SubhanAllah. If we've got the right intention of what we're doing, we're going to be rewarded for it also. MashaAllah. So this is really good. I just wanted to come back before we end, you know, and we've got another 6 or so minutes left in the show, about the relationships, because you spoke about this earlier on, about the the solid family relationships, the couples, demonstrating what they want their children to learn and being open about this. What happens in some families, though, is that that relationship is not a good relationship, and often one or other are making excuses or not understanding each other or having headaches and not there for each other. What advice would you give for families, for couples like this that are in this situation? I think it's important that we kind of spend a couple of minutes talking about this so they know how they can help themselves and what should they be doing.
I think they should address the issues really. So it's if they're unhappy, and if you think about marriage, but then you start from the family, as children, if we are unhappy, then it affects us, doesn't it? And similarly, if two adults, when they're living together, if they're not happy with each other, and if they're bickering or they're avoiding each other and they can't really bring harmony and they're not on the same page because there's a lot going on, then I think they need help, and acknowledging that we need help rather than normalizing. Because like we've normalized the lockdown and we're managing, but that doesn't mean it's healthy. You know, we're all struggling. And I think similarly, if our relationship is in crisis, we're just kind of ticking over. That doesn't mean it's good for our spiritual health or mental health or emotional health. So I think people need to be open and ask for help if they need help. Definitely.
And
often avoiding.
Sorry, Brother Saeed, continue.
Can I answer to Kathleen?
I was just going to say that both of you give help, and maybe you can give out your names or your websites so that people, if they're listening in today, could know where to go for that help, or they can pass on that information to others that they may know is suffering. Because as you mentioned rightly, people do not often come and look for that help, and then because of that they are pushed or they go in other directions and seek help, even unknowing to themselves, get caught into either going out with the gang when they will be going out with again when everything's opening up, going out with the gang and spend more time outside, you know, their friends, their male friends or female friends, spend more time outside or watching more things on TV or online, and get sucked into maybe inappropriate, unsafe areas that it becomes normal then. As your brother said, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to just add, I think the most important, as Sister Abeda said, I think sometimes when people are avoiding things, there's often the avoidance is a symptoms for something deeper. And often if those issues are not dealt with, then they fester in the family unit, and then they impact on the wider family circle. So sometimes, you know, it's not just about what happens between the husband and the wife, but is how it impacts on the children. And often the psychological damage that is caused by the lack of interaction or respect or healthy, you know, how they value one another. And often that kind of filters through to the children. Children are very observant, and they will observe how their parents are behaving. And often, you know, they might not be able to express it in words, but they feel it. So it's really important that when parents have or couples have difficulties, as Sister Abeda said, that they seek solutions. And nothing, you know, is unsurmountable. Everything has a solution and a resolution. And we only need to find the keys, you know, to kind of unlock, you know, that issue or that difficulty.
Wonderful indeed. And do you have websites or email address that people could?
Yeah, I mean, for me, people can reach out to me. You know, my email address is Saeed, SAED _NASSER @hotmail.com, or they can go to the Muslim Counsellor and Psychotherapist Network, which is in Google, if they put down Google, and if they go to the directory, then my details are there, inshallah.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah. And Sister Abeda?
People, if they Google my website, which is amanacounseling.com, they can just find the details, and there's the email address there, which is info@amanacounseling.com.
Wonderful, mashallah. And of course, they can come to Approachable Parenting or Unity FM, and we'll pass on those details as well to them. Is there any one tip that you could now in the last minute of the show give us, indeed, to our parents who are decided to build up the courage that they're going to sit down tonight and talk to their children about their development?
I think first
sorry,
one is, so to start with.
Bismillah.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think just for me is about respect and dialogue. It's about having respect for each other and having dialogue and communication, you know, communicating about certain things, not shying away from talking about these issues.
Sister Abeda?
Just exactly that, communication and not shying away.
Wonderful, and lots of fun and laughter in the home and cuddles together, inshallah. I hope you enjoyed this evening's session, inshallah, and that you have got lots of cuddles in your families, indeed, and we come closer together in this difficult time of lockdown. May Allah look after you all, inshallah, ameen, inshallah, and look after our guests and bless them for coming on this evening. Jazakallah khairan to you both. We really appreciate you giving up your time. Thank you so much for this. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.